Get out of my house, dude. Don't come through the door. I will shoot.
Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I'm very grateful for you. Listen, I apologize for not being on more. I've been so busy running my business at Practical Defense Systems, I've just run myself out of time. Today, I've got a great interview with Rick Travis from the California Rifle and Pistol Association, and it's a very valuable one for you, I think, because it's going to share a lot of information about what has happened in the legislature and what's about to happen in the legislature of California now that we're on a break of sorts, but not really. I'm going to run the entire interview rather than breaking it into segments because this information is extremely important. And so while I generally break things into shorter pieces, I apologize for that. I'm just going to post the whole darn thing. Let's go talk to Rick. Rick, thank you very much for joining me. It's been a while that we've had you on the show. I apologize for the delay, and I guess a lot has happened at the Capitol in the intervening time. So I'm going to turn it over, just a wee bit. So I'm going to turn it over to you because I have a feeling California gun owners really need to know what's going on, and you're the man who knows. What's been happening?
So we've moved into what's called the recess, which normally you would be jumping up and down and going, yes, the children are out for the summer. Yeah, the children are out creating more problems during this time for the summer. So it's not much of a recess. That's why Sam and Dan and a couple of my other counterparts, we're all working around the clock. Normally, we try to cool our jets and take a little time off to gain back, but we're not being able to do that. And that's because we're having to fight a very corrupt, and I can't say that enough, legislature. And I'm going to call a couple people out. We have Assembly Bill 28 that's still in play. That is the gun violence protection tax, also known as the excise tax, that adds an extra 11% to the purchase of all firearms, ammunition, accessories, parts. It was formerly 1227 and 1223 and 18 over the last few years. And so I nicknamed it, I think a little over a year ago on your show, the zombie bill, because it kept coming back and kept having to beat it. But we had a really interesting, in the week leading up to the recess, which started last Friday, we had a really interesting testimony. We had a young lady, her name was Lola, or I should say is Lola, and she comes from a shotgun team at an all-Catholic school here in Los Angeles. She came up and testified. And Joel, both amazing what she did, but incredibly disheartening over how government's supposed to function and what really happened. You know, she came up to oppose it and talk about how those taxes are pricing youth shooters out of being able to compete. It's killing programs right and left, which is factual. And he looks at her and says, well, there's nothing in my bill that does that. And she's like, no, you're wrong. And he gets a little condescending with her and says, no, sweetie, you don't understand. When she opens up a 3-ring notebook that she had placed his entire bill, all the writing, all the testimony in it, and it earmarked it and highlighted. And she repeats back to him the evidence. And he looks at her and goes, well, I still think you're misunderstanding. He looks over to his staff. His staff is kind of like, we don't know what's going on, which is what we face all the time. And then she's like, well, this is legal words, and this is what these words mean. She's 16, and she's doing this to him. And
it just goes to show that not only are people stupid, but our legislature certainly falls into that description. And almost entirely, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then when we get into the actual public testimony, she stands her ground again. And he basically insults her in his closing remarks by saying, well, that was nice that she came up, but he had a discussion with her, and they're just going to have to agree to disagree on the understanding of the bill, and moves straight on and just runs over her. So that bill is coming down to a floor vote. And so when we come back on the 14th of August, we're going to be fighting that bill extremely hard. We've had some Democrats in the past who have resisted it. Personally, I think that's because they didn't like the previous assemblyman that was carrying it. So now they've joined as co-authors. So look for things from our organization, Sam's organization, and others. They're going to tell you very specifically who we need you to call, write, meet, and put the pressure on, because this is going to come down to a floor vote like it did last year to try to stop this bill.
Now, this is a tax? Does that mean they have to have 2/3 of both houses, or does that not be the case?
2/3.
So we actually have a chance of beating it if we get on it.
In the
some
Senate,
of these,
not the Assembly. The Assembly is more than 2/3 the votes. They can vote on party lines and it's done. And frankly, in the Senate, we need 6 Democrats to vote with us. But if they vote party lines, it's done.
wow. Okay. Well, obviously we need to keep an eye on your alerts. If you haven't signed up for the CRPA alerts, I urge you to do that. Go to crpa.org and sign up for the alerts so that they come in. You'll know exactly what to do and when to do it. And that way we can stomp some of these things dead. What else is going on? I'm almost afraid to ask, but I'm going to anyway. It's a painful question.
Yeah, and I'm gonna talk, because there are some Democrats who do support firearms, who do some things, not always all the way across the board. Like if there's 20 bills, a couple of people I'm going to mention are not going to be 20 times voting for us, but probably 12 to 13 times voting for us, not voting at all, 4 or 5 times, and sometimes they do vote against us on it. Senator,
before you go any further, just for the, I know it's inside baseball. What does it mean when somebody just doesn't vote or they vote present or whatever? I mean, what effect does that have?
Well, the effect it has is, say, like what we were just talking about on a 2/3 bill. If somebody just doesn't vote, then they don't get the votes they need to get it passed. They'll never get that 66% or 67% for the 2/3, because if people abstain and just don't vote, then they don't get enough votes. So not voting for me on a lot of things is just as good as voting opposing the bill.
So why would somebody choose not to vote? Is it just because they're too chicken-livered and they're afraid of their own base? I mean, why would somebody just choose not to vote or vote present or abstain or whatever?
Sometimes that's a base thing. Sometimes there's a lot of different motivations for politicians to do that. Maybe the politician doesn't like the person running the bill, which I think was the case last year. So some people are like, you know what? No, we're not going to let you have this win. So we're just not going to vote. So sometimes it can be as petty as that. And while, I shake my head sometimes, you see that in your own private businesses and other places, people do some petty things. So that happens. But at the end of the day, if we can get people not to vote that are opposing us, that's as good as getting them to vote for us.
Okay. Well, anyway, I wanted to have some clarification on that. So go ahead with where you were going.
So Senator Cortese, after we had an issue that I would say was pretty substantial, which was dealing with Hollywood and a certain firearms accident that killed a couple of people in a state called New Mexico, with a guy named Alec Baldwin. Not that I
was going to say, in case you're wondering what that is, Alec Baldwin can explain that to you.
Right. But Senator Cortese came out with a bill mandating firearm safety training, range safety officers, things of this nature be mandated in the motion picture industry in Hollywood, which you would think would be a slam dunk.
Okay, wait, hold on. You've got, so that isn't happening now? I mean, you have OSHA reps and safety people like that. Anytime you have a big production like that, there's nobody there with regard to the firearms?
There's people there, but there's not a universal training. There are some very good people in the industry that I've got to know that work really hard to make sure the sets are safe. But there's nothing in there like, for a range safety officer, if they screw up, literally the NRA, CRPA, whoever the organization, we can revoke their credentials immediately. There are things we can do that should pull them off of that position. Ranges can say, never again. But if you go back and you look at some of the things that have happened to like Bruce Lee's son, Brandon, when he died on set, you look at...
there was the set of The Crow, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
several of the other people in between time before this happened out on Baldwin's production, firearms accidents happen on sets, and they really haven't improved it. Cortese came through and said, well, hey, Hollywood's in California, let's do something about that, and came out with a bill that said, hey, you got to have the appropriate training, you have to have the appropriate safety measures in place. We require this of people in their homes, require this of people on ranges. Why wouldn't it be required on sets? Which, like, again, you would think this would be a slam dunk.
But no.
Hollywood starts calling up the people that they donate to and go, we don't want to go to a class. You can't do this to us. Come on, we're having a party Friday night. We want to do what we want to do. We don't. And they've whined enough that for the second year in a row, the bill has been stalled and effectively killed by the Democrats, who say they're there for firearms safety. And I bring this up because, yes, do I feel bad for the senator? Of course I do. Do I think the senator is trying to do a great thing and his staff have worked hard on it? Yes. But it's also to prove my point that I make all the time with you and others. Don't tell me this isn't about gun control when this was probably the easiest doggone piece of legislation for them to push through on firearms safety training. And they didn't do it.
Well, and it's not like there aren't range safety officers available.
Right.
I mean, the NRA has certified them all over the place. CRPA is certifying them all over the state. I are one, chief range safety officer, and that kind of stuff. So I mean, they're all over the place, and it's not like it's a draconian. I almost have a knee-jerk reaction that says this isn't something that should be legislated. It's something that should be common sense, and it's something that you would think that any company desirous of not exposing themselves to litigation and liability would automatically make those steps. But at some point when they don't, maybe it does need to be legislation. But one way or the other, you would think that this would be easy peasy, that wouldn't be hard for them to pass that in California.
Well, and you also have to look, you've got people like a Tom Cruise or Keanu Reeves who do some incredible stunts, often involving firearms. But both of those individuals also are noted for practicing countless hours at some very well-known ranges here in California, honing those skills, making sure they have all the safety. And then you have Baldwin, where allegedly there were drugs, alcohol, firearms, everything. Nobody checking anything, everybody pointing the finger at each other, and have just the basic 3 rules of don't point a firearm at someone unless you intend to shoot them.
That didn't work. Don't put your finger on the trigger, right?
Yeah, don't put your finger on the trigger. So had any of those 3 been followed, that incident doesn't happen, yet no one wants to take responsibility. So that's what this bill was about. And unfortunately, this is why I say we see some good pieces of legislation that should have went through that didn't. And so, a couple of the other ones that we're facing off, of course, is Senate Bill 2, which is going after Bruin. And that's coming down to the wire. We personally at CRPA have a couple of different lawsuits set up, already ready to go to get the injunction on that if it gets passed. But the governor is fighting very, very hard. If Sam was on here, we could both tell you that he's got the attorney general also working through his wife, who is a member of the legislature, pushing very hard on many people to make sure this is a slam dunk. And the number of times we've confronted the author in testimony, all of us who are in this space, and have been told, yeah, we'll get together. Yeah, there's been no meetings. There's been no attempt because he doesn't care.
Now, this is the bill that's the retread of 918, where they're trying to make the whole state a sensitive place in violation of the express instructions in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin case, where the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't do that. And I believe they used the island of Manhattan and said you can't make the whole island of Manhattan a sensitive place. And they kind of limited sensitive places. But this is just taking 918 and renumbering it and going back at it again. Did I get that right?
Yep, and they're doing all sorts of stuff. They're trying to make it much more difficult and egregious for someone to obtain a CCW by, the Supreme Court didn't say anything on hours. So we're going to increase the number of hours of training. We're going to increase the cost. We're going to increase this. We're going to increase that. Like, it's just everything they could think of to make it more, onerous for anyone to be able to go and exercise their rights.
Well, it's certainly job security for Chuck Michel and his staff because they're going to be in court a lot, I'm sure. All right. Well, now what are the odds if you had to put a percentage on it? What are the odds you think of SB 2 actually passing? Yeah.
Probably about 95% right now.
Okay, so yeah, wow. So, and you said Chuck's got, I assume, Michelle and Associates have lawsuits queued up and ready to drop the moment that the thing is signed. I assume with the initial aim of having a stay put on its enforcement, an injunction. So we may find it passes and gets signed by Governor Gruesome Nuisance, but it may not actually be in effect very long if they can get an injunction against it while they're fighting.
This is a good point to make right now, Joel, and it's a point that I struggle with a lot of people. They're like, oh, well, Rick, you failed us because Senate Bill 2 got across. No, I didn't fail you because it was a lot more egregious than it is now. So we got some things knocked out of it. But the more important point is, during this whole time for the last 2 years, we've had lawyers working to make sure that every time this is changed and altered, the lawsuit and the injunction and all the things are lined up so that, when it gets signed, it will go in effect. I think this one goes in effect on most bills are either January 1 or July 1. I believe Senate Bill 2 is January 1. The moment it goes in effect, the injunction gets hit.
Now, that's the difference between the last time, right? The last time they tried to do it as an emergency bill, which means it would have gone into effect when the governor signed it. Right. But that's not the case here because they could. You guys beat them down and kept them from getting the 2/3 majority needed.
Right.
So this time, it doesn't go into effect until 24.
Right.
So does that give you lead time then to get prepared to swat it down?
Right. Not that we need it because literally, I know the lawyers over at Chuck's shop are chomping at the bit to go after this because they've put themselves in a really bad position to be able to defend.
Not Chuck's lawyers. The state has put themselves in a bad position. It's going to be difficult for them to defend that. So you said you guys knocked some things out of it. It's not as bad as it would have been otherwise.
No, it's still horrible. Okay, so that's like saying it's not as bad as like saying, we knocked 20 megatons out of a 100 megaton nuke out. The state of Los Angeles is still gone.
Okay.
But, one of the things that I think is important for people to realize is they're not going to be harmed on it. When the injunction goes through, it doesn't apply. But the fight to stop it from applying will take probably 2 or 3 years at least.
Okay, so just a point of clarification now, because I can see the comments already. So if this thing gets signed, which I'm like you, I think 99%. You're hedging your bet by saying 98%. I think it's 100%, but there you are. So when it gets signed, if the Earth's crust doesn't explode and everybody doesn't die between now and then it doesn't necessarily go into effect because Chuck's team is going to attack the snot out of it. They're ready to do that anyway. And if they get an injunction against it, that means it may be law, but it cannot be enforced. Which means that for all practical purposes, it has no effect during the time it takes to fight it in court.
Correct.
Okay, so there may be a fight that takes a year or two to fight, but during that period of time, it probably won't be enforced anyway. Right. So it really, for all practical purposes, it will not have any effect on people with concealed carry permits in California. Did I get all that right?
Correct.
Had I known there was a quiz, I would have studied, but apparently I didn't need to, so I'm doing good. All right. Okay, the floor is yours again. I just wanted some clarification.
No. We have another bill. It's Assembly Bill 262. It's a camp bill. We're still fighting that one. And again, this is a bill that looks at face value. That's a feel good because this is kind of the interesting part of it. It's called Roxy's Rules. It was about a girl in Portantino's district that unfortunately died at a summer camp at a pool. And so, responding to that, came out with this camp bill. But this bill is one of the most egregious pieces of legislation. This is one of the ways they get on. This is a good kind of educational moment for all of us. The legislature loves to do what are called study bills. So you, rightfully so, are like very anti, and I agree with you on gun and amends. I actually hate study bills more than gun and amends. Any bill can be gun and amended. So you may have an author who had 6 bills, and maybe one of those bills was a water bill. And, they introduced it in February, and by April, May-ish, while it's been going through the system, the local water board that has fixed whatever the problem was the bill was going to fix. And so now the author's like, well, right, I have this bill.
I'll make it something else.
Then somebody comes in and says, hey, you're not doing anything with this bill. Can we make it? And then they strip it other than the bill number and do exactly. And that becomes the gun amend. So a great example of that would be a bill that I'll talk about in a few minutes that has to do with merchant codes. And before it was a housing bill. So there's no way you would see it.
So what's the other thing you were talking about that you hate
Well, the
more?
other one that to me, so at least when you get this thing, like when they did the merchant code bill, you get an announcement, you know what it's about. You're like, oh, well, I hate it. It's disingenuous because it's already usually cleared one house of all of its committees. So you only have half the time to rebut it that you would have normally had on a bill. But it's not as underhanded to me as a study bill is. And what a study bill is, hey, Joel, I'm not passing a new law. I'm passing a piece of legislation that says, let's study A and come up with recommendations to improve whatever A is. And then those recommendations become what I call low-hanging fruit for next year's class of Sac State political science dropouts to go work at the Capitol. Because then they're like, they don't have to think to come up with a bill. They just grab any one of these recommendations, which there's usually 25 to 50 of, and those become legislation. So that's why I hate study bills, because trying to get people on board to fight a study bill, they're like, it doesn't do anything to me. Not this year. But if it gets through, it's not going to be one bill. It's like Medusa's head. The snake just explodes, and the multiple snakes. So that's what 262, this camp bill is. This bill is supposed to look at every possible recommendation for safety on ranges involving youth. And so people are like, well, how is that really that bad of a thing? And I've had people in our community say that. So I'll give you one example, because I don't want to give all of them because I don't want to teach the opposition. I've been on youth pheasant hunts, just taking it down to youth pheasant hunt thing. I've been on youth pheasant hunts where it was 3 teams that processed 25 kids in a day of hunting, because you took one kid at a time, those 3 teams, I've also been at ones that were done by Fish and Game, where you have a lot of wardens that want to come out and help kids and also check off how much time they've worked with the public, because that's one of the things that they've got to do as part of their job performance. And so they come out, they're having fun with the kids, but now it's one warden / instructor / safety person per kid. So now when you have somebody up in the Capitol going, well, what's the correct number we should have? Oh, well, in this one, and it was a state thing, it was 1-to-1. Well, now all of a sudden that could go across and it'd be like, oh, so for every Boy Scout, we need 800 people at summer camp that are all trained to this level to work with them. Like you see where this can go, like very quickly. And then people are like, well, we can't do that. Well, if you can't do that, then you can't have that. And then there goes that. And that's just one very narrow slice of where this could go. So
So the bottom line is, when CRPA comes out and says this is a study bill, we need to oppose it, and we need to get up off our butts off the couch and oppose it before it becomes Medusa's nightmare, or right. Medusa is a nightmare, and haunts us for years to come. So these things, I assume, are not just next year's problem. They're the following several years' problems.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this show is supposed to be educational, so if you're watching it, I hope you're getting an education out of the darn thing. Oh my gosh. Okay, what else?
Yeah,
God
and
help
then,
us. What else?
yeah. So
People,
there
you know,
also-
Rick, people ask me why I stay in California to fight this stuff. And now I don't get that question anymore. Now that they've all moved to Texas and, you know, and they've moved to Nevada and like that. And this crap is following them wherever they go. I don't get that question anymore. Isn't that shocking? Why don't you just move? This is from people who have moved and wish that the problem didn't chase them. Well, if that's you, now you know why we're still here. So anyway, go
well,
ahead. I'm sorry, I'm ranting. I apologize.
no, there's no problem with ranting because you bring up a very good point that I actually spoke about earlier today in another meeting. And that was, you know, I've got plenty of friends in this industry that have moved to states like Arizona, Texas, etc. Last year, as you know, because we talked about on your show, we had a bill 2571 that went targeted youth shooting sports specifically. And we have a case that CRPA is pushing forward that deals with the youth magazines, which are the publications for youth shooting sports, are suing Bonta over that very bill. 24 states joined us in amicus briefs. Their attorney generals are like, yeah, not coming to our state. We're fighting. And I have friends in many, many states that have moved because, you know what, this is a God-loving, this state will, no, we'll stop that. Oh, states that did not join us on this battle, Texas, Arizona, Tennessee, some states a lot of gun-loving Californians moved to, which, by the way, are no longer red states anymore. They're changing colors quite rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you know, I'm an Arizona resident to some degree, and I've been saying for years, don't California my Arizona. Well, guess what? They didn't listen to me. I mean, it's kind of going that direction. So
that's
anyway.
why I tell people all the time, like, you've got to fight the fight and stop the stupidity, because if you don't, it's just going to move to your neighborhood. We also have a bill called 1089, and it's by Assemblyman Gibson, and it's going after all of the, as you know, abilities to make parts. And one of the things that people keep hearing, because he keeps throwing up there, well, we can't have 3D printing of guns and stuff like this. Well, okay, number one, you can't go after people with 3D printers and CNC machines and say you can make this, can't make that. That violates parts of the Constitution. But more importantly, what people are forgetting is you may have bought a classic firearm that the company's not doesn't exist, or they don't make those parts anymore. Well, the beauty is there's enough diagrams out there that you could replace the broken part to keep the firearm safe. And then they're also trying to, you know, because government's not big enough, they're trying to come up with a licensing scheme that would prohibit anybody from selling or possessing a machine unless they were state licensed.
Wait, a CNC machine or a 3D printer?
Yep.
So wait, they want to come up with something that says you have to have a license to own it, and then you can't transfer it unless you have a license. And our founding fathers were upset over the cost of tea.
Yeah.
And the tax, a 3% tax, by the way,
Yeah.
on tea. Okay.
Now, I always love that when you go back into George Washington's Mount Vernon, and there's the quote up on the wall in Mount Vernon where he said, the people have a right to revolt if the government ever raises taxes above 3%.
3. Right.
So California, we're at like way over 10 times that amount. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So there are also, we still have Assembly Bill 1406, which is another one I don't like, which is trying to make it so it would literally be one firearm, period, every 30 days. There would no longer be a private party exemption to that rule. So literally, it would be one firearm, which means even if you
wait, just let me. I want to make sure. Are you saying that we could only purchase one firearm per month?
Right.
And that would include transferring it from a private party transfer, or maybe I give my son a gun or whatever.
All the
doesn't matter.
exemptions go bye-bye.
Okay. What is I don't even know what the purpose of that is.
Well,
Does that, and anyway, go ahead.
one of the things that we're fighting on that particular bill is to try to sit there and say, look, there's a lot of people who are collectors. There's, again, I had a conversation this morning with somebody that said, hey, you know, over the years, I've collected lots of different firearms, put them together, changed them out. He's in the industry. So, you know, you get like you have a couple times like a part or a barrel or something comped, and he's tweaked them all out. And he said, now it's gotten to the point of like, he goes, I honestly don't know what I would ask to have donated or purchased to tweak, because I've kind of done like all the combinations I could think of. And so now he's like 65 and going, I don't need 40 hunting rifles. So he wants to get rid of those. Well, this going through would take him several years to do that, where in the status quo, he could take them one place, put them all out there, sell them, get his money, do whatever else he wanted to go do. And some people would get some really nice firearms. Yeah. But it also has an impact too that a lot of people don't think about. And I can use myself. I, at one point, had 22 rifles. And people are like, why? Well, wait, 10 of them were the exact same model number. Why? Because I worked with Boy Scouts and 4-H. And so those were the firearms that, you know, I would take down to the range, and with parent permission, following all the rules set up in this state, the kids would use those firearms. Well, when I no longer had a daughter in the program and my sons had got out of scouting because they'd already made Eagle and aged out, I hung around for a couple of years. But then when it came time to transfer them, the troop or the 4-H unit can possess them. That's against the law in California. But I could, technically, if you were the new person coming to replace me, I could have went down to a Turner's, for example, and transferred them all one time to you. Under this, 20 things, that's probably 2 years minimum. I don't want to hang around for 2 years. These are like the most egregious ones right now. Blake Spear has Senate Bill 452. That's the last one I'll talk about. She is still trying to say that the whole process of microstamping works. We have had numerous people, including the inventor of the concept of microstamping, testify it was a bad idea. It doesn't work. No. And her last speech was, California has often been the leader because we've taken 20 years to come up with a way to make things work. So we helped put a man on the moon. We can make this happen. So pass it anyways. And we're like, you've already been told by the Supreme Court, not constitutional. You've already been told by multiple district courts, not constitutional. This is going to cost taxpayers' monies. Pass it anyways.
They don't care. You know, this is an example, and I'm gonna opine here. We're supposed to have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And California is a prime example of what happens when the people allow a government of the government, by the government, and for the government. And this is why it needs to be fought and beat down in states like this to do this kind of stuff, and not allowed to infect other states. California's not the only one. I mean, Hawaii, New York, New Jersey. Look at Washington and Oregon, both of which used to be much freer than they are today. California, when I was growing up, when you were growing up, it was a reliably red state. So it can go the other way. I don't see it happening in my lifetime, but I suppose it's possible. But the battles need to be fought here. They need to be fought here, and they need to be fought in New York and New Jersey and Illinois and these other places where the government has become so onerous that it now is we're subservient to it rather than the government being subservient to us. The idea that that young lady could go and testify in the state legislature and they felt the authority and right to be disrespectful of her when they are supposed to be the servants, not her, I find extraordinarily telling. That stuff's got to stop.
It's interesting to note that, you know, during the 1990s, a lot of people saw California still at that point much more conservative than Texas, who had Ann Richards as a governor. Ann Richards was being purported to be like possibly the first female president of the United States. And then they had a shooting at a place called Luby's. And for those that haven't been to Texas and don't know what a Luby's is, a Luby's is like a Denny's, only the entire front wall that goes to the generally makes a V and goes out to the parking lot is all glass. And back then, when after the Luby's shooting, 60 Minutes went out to interview people, and they interviewed this young girl who was kind of the stereotypical little blonde-haired girl from Texas. And they interviewed her and said, how did it feel to lose both your parents in this shooting? Which, like, that's just bad journalism in my book, but okay. And her reply was, well, I wish my governor would have allowed me to use the firearm that was right there in my truck on the other side of the glass, because I couldn't have saved everybody. But I might have been able to save my mom or my dad.
That same woman has testified before Congress and told that story across this nation. And I hope she continues to do so. Unfortunately, her story is not unique anymore.
Right. And what happened in that was Texas in about 18 months went from being a very, very blue state to becoming a red state. And we had people like former Governor Rick Perry, who was a Democrat, who was anti-Second Amendment, flip sides and saw where the people wanted government to go and actually moved. And I bring that up because I think a lot of people forget this state called California is literally ran by 40 people in the Senate and 3 times that amount in the Assembly and a handful of other elected positions. It's like less than 250 people are dictating 38 million people's lives. 38 million people means it's still we the people. We can change this, but we have to get out and vote, which is one of the reasons that during this recess, I'm hitting 14 cities in 6 days, giving speeches of just how to do that, just how to start flipping votes.
Well, and Friday night, I've got to travel on Friday, so I'll be gone Friday morning out to Arizona, and then I'm coming back specifically to attend the South Orange County CRPA chapter meeting with Pete at 6 p.m., I think. If you are in California and you are not a member of a local chapter of CRPA, I have to ask, what in the heck are you thinking? Get into those meetings and you're going to know what's going on. You don't have to wait for the video to come out. Okay, because this is a volunteer effort on my part. So I only have so much time to do this, which is why it doesn't happen as often as you might like. I got a business to run and life to lead and like that, but I'm doing my best. You got to get out there on your own. Get to those meetings. And if you don't know where they are, you can go on the CRPA website, again, crpa.org, and find them. Join, if you haven't already. Find a chapter. If there isn't one in your area, guess what you can do? You can raise your hand and you can start one. It's easy. Just reach out to CRPA and say, I don't have a chapter in my area, I want to start one. That's how we get a groundswell, and that's what it's going to take. Unless we want to wait for some horrendous event, like what happened at Luby's, I don't think I want to do that. I'm sure you don't either. So, that's one way to get involved.
So on the positive side, we've got, like I said, as I go on this tour, we've got sold out crowds, literally people packing restaurants and stuff to meet. So there's a groundswell. So I'm encouraged. And we were able to flip some seats in some elections in the 2022s. And we look to do so again in 24 and 26.
That is incredibly encouraging. And I know that, Sam and gun owners of California are working hard right along with you. So
Yep.
that's it's extremely encouraging. By the way, Sam was going to be on the show today, but his grandkids showed up.
He was invaded.
He was invaded by grandchildren. That's why he sent me a text. He said, "Hey, Joel, can I do this another day? I've been invaded. I've had invaders show up at my house. All of his grandkids showed up, so he'll be on."
Kids were so demanding that they wanted to be with their grandfather in their swimming pool. Like, wow.
Gee, it's only like 110 or 105 or whatever. I wonder why that is. And they don't have a pool, but Grandpa and Grandma do. So there you go. That explains that. Well, is there anything else we haven't talked about that we probably should?
No, incredibly grateful though for being on the show today.
No, anytime, Rick. And if you're watching, once again, I apologize for my absence. I've been busy trying to keep Practical Defense Systems running. We've opened a bunch of other things. Oh, hey, and by the way, one of the things we're starting to do is we're starting to teach CRPA firearms classes here in San Diego at Practical Defense Systems. So you might go on the website and check it out. That'd be kind of cool. And we'll be teaching those more. My son's actually getting involved. He'll start teaching those here pretty soon too, which is kind of cool. So again, if you're not a member of CRPA, you're not a member of Gun Owners of California, you need to join both. You'll find links in the description. And make sure that you're active so we can fight these things here. We've got momentum. We got momentum. Don't we have momentum?
Yep, we do. We're winning in the court cases. And, I look back, when Sam and I talk to people, if this was baseball, I only have to get, as you know, on base like 31% of the time, and I'm probably going to the Hall of Fame. 83% of what was thrown at us is dead. It's off the plate. And yet people are like, how is there still 17? Look, we're doing our best to go 100%, but
okay, so I want to hear that figure again. So you're talking about legislatively, 83% of the nasty, horrible bills that could have passed in the legislature that would have been anti-gun and damaged people's rights in the state of California. You guys killed between you and Dan Reed and Sam. Yep. So you and Dan Reed at NRA and Sam Paredes at Gun Owners of California, you guys killed 83% of those?
Yeah. I want to give a hat tip to my good friend Mike Finley from National Shooting Sports Foundation, Bill Gaines, who represents Safari Club International and a lot of other groups throughout the state. There is a group of us that have been fighting, and that's our success rate.
83%.
Yeah.
Boy, I'd like to see 100, but 83 ain't bad. I mean, that's pretty good. And then now you mentioned this one before, and I know we're going a little long here, but I think this is valuable to know because I want to understand it as well. Does what you do in the legislature, you group of folks, does that cue thing? So when something actually does pass, it gets past you, becomes law.
That testimony gives us standing to fight those egregious laws against.
So that cues things up for Chuck and his team. So right. exactly how does that do that? I remember, forgive me for asking probably a layperson's question, but I don't understand.
No, because what we're showing is, the state's always got, well, we didn't know. We didn't know, Judge Joel, that was going to be a problem. How would we know? Why are you coming after us? Why are you being mean to us? And then they go back and go, well, because Dan, Sam, Rick, and there's several other people, Mark, Finn, all these other people that work in this area. They told you here, can point to the testimony. That testimony becomes part of court record. And then the judge is looking, going, well, obviously you were warned that this was unconstitutional this many times. And obviously you were warned that you weren't supposed to do this, and you were warned because they cited this case and this case and this case. So we could have avoided all this court stuff had you just listened. And then that forces the state to ask for a delay, which they always do. And then they try to come up with other reasons why they should still be okay. And that's where the court battle, why Chuck's people are always prepping the other part too. So yeah.
How interesting. I had no idea about that. So the work you're doing in testifying is not just valuable only at that moment on that bill. It's valuable in Chuck's fight later on.
Correct.
As he goes to court to beat these things back. How cool is that? Well, that's awesome, Rick. Thank you very much for coming on the show. You helped a lot. I learned a lot. Hopefully, if you're watching, you learned a lot. That's the general idea. And if you have not, I'm going to say it again. If you're not a member of Gun Owners of California, if you're not a member of CRPA, join. And I don't care if you're in California or not. If you left California and you moved to my second home state of Arizona, or you moved to Texas, or you moved to Florida, or you moved to wherever, this is coming to a zip code near you if we don't kill this stuff here. I can't say that more strongly. So even if you're not in California, please join CRPA. CRPA.org. There's a link in the description. Please join Gun Owners of California. There's a link in the description. We need your help to fight this stuff here. That's that. I can't say it more strongly.
And I will also say that CRPA is currently involved in amicus cases throughout the country. So we fight in your state for your rights as well.
I did not know. Actually, I think I did know that because I think you'd mentioned that before, and so has Sam, and I think Chuck has mentioned it. By the way, Chuck Michelle, I hope, is going to be able to come on the show maybe next week to give us an update on court cases. There was a big hearing just yesterday or the day before in San Diego before Judge Benitez, the gentleman we call Saint Benitez here in San Diego. And so hopefully we'll get some decisions out of him soon. Thank you again, Rick. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you very much for watching the interview. I'm very grateful. Stay in the fight. We're winning. We're certainly winning in the courts. We got a lot of momentum in the courts. And when Rick can honestly say to me that between he and Sam and Dan Reed and others, they're killing an average of 83% of the bills that are proposed in the California legislature so that they never become law. It's not a perfect record, but it's a darn good one. So they need your support. I've said it 2 or 3 times during the interview, so I'm going to say it one last time. Thank you again. Have a wonderful week. Wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.